Coyotes, welcome back to the CSUSB Advising Podcast. My name is Matt Markin, an academic advisor here at Cal State San Bernardino. And on today's episode, we welcome Dr. Scot Zentner, professor and department chair of political science. And we're learning more about the poli-sci major. Dr. Zentner, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in higher ed and CSUSB?
I'm actually a graduate of Cal State San Bernardino. I graduated the school in 1988. I grew up in Moreno Valley. I was actually born in March Air Force Base, and eventually found my way, wandered into Cal State, went to junior college for 1 year, didn't do very well. Actually, I had to petition to get into Cal State. I often tell this story to students. First generation student, nobody in my immediate family went to college, and I ended up going to Cal State. Ended up going all the way. I went to graduate school in Michigan State, and they happened to be hiring when I was finishing up at grad school, and got a job at Cal State San Bernardino. So I've been involved in the campus, except for the few years I was in grad school, since 1984. And I'm in my 30th year of teaching at Cal State. And I tell students, like I say, I'm kind of a poster child for the mission of the university, which is to mainly cater to first generation students and help move them up in their lives and, show them opportunities. And I didn't know anything about becoming a professor, had no idea how you even did this, and even learned about what graduate school was while I was in college. But I got the bug. I got interested in political science, political philosophy. That's my main area. It's political theory. And most of my publications or writing deal with what is generally called American political thought. So it's been great, and like I say, I'm a child of the CSU.
Yeah, very much so, and I think I can relate to you as well. Graduate from Cal State San Bernardino, and also from Moreno Valley, so we have that in common. So, can you tell us a little bit more, like how you would describe political science or the political science major?
Well, I mean, political science as a whole is one of the oldest disciplines. The only disciplines that really rival it are what we call philosophy and history. Of course, philosophy 2,500 years ago really included much of what today would be called the natural sciences, especially physics, astronomy, things like that. But it's a very old discipline, and really, political science, like much of the university, just sort of formally, the way universities are structured, reflects those original origins. And most political science departments around the country are divided into several fields. Our department is done the same way. Our specific major, is designed in a very sort of simple, straightforward way. In fact, we have a very high graduation rate. There's a mission of the university to get people out, complete their degrees. We're way ahead of the targets, both for the university and for our college, social behavioral sciences. And I think part of it has to do with the number of units is relatively small. It's 36 units. But the major also is very straightforward. There's 3 core courses that you take. There's one course in each of 5 fields that you take. That you're required to take, but there's options within those 5. So there's 4, 5, 6 classes in each of those 5 fields you have to take, and then we have 3 electives that the student has to take. 2 of them are senior seminars, but they're topics classes which can be repeated, and there's many of them offered every term, and that's it. And every major student is the same. And we don't have a lot of problems with bottlenecks. Occasionally things like that will happen, but getting in and out is pretty easy. And I can go into the fields if you want me to.
Yeah, definitely, if you can.
Yeah, so 3 core courses, 2 of them are offered usually at junior colleges, so most transfer students will have at least one of these classes, and that's the standard U.S. government course, which many students take outside the major. There's a lower division international relations class that you have to take. A good number of transfer students take that. That's usually offered at all junior colleges. And then we have sort of an unusual class. It's an upper division class. It's called American Political Thought. It mainly focuses on is really a theory philosophy class. on the principles and ideas that animated the founding of the United States. But also, professors have the option; they can add in more things, and some professors take it up through, say, the progressive era. At the end of, around the turn of the 20th century. So between those three classes, the American government class, the international relations, and the American political thought class, you really get an introduction to sort of the touchstones of what the fields are. So, and then those 5 required fields that you have to take a class on what we call American politics. That's where you have the American presidency, Congress, classes like that. We have the public law field. You learn specific classes dealing with Bill of Rights, things like that. Then we have the political philosophy or political theory field, which our classes are mainly set forth in a kind of a historical vein. So you have a class in classical political theory that you read people like Plato and Aristotle. And then you have modern classes where you read people like Machiavelli, that kind of thing. Then we have comparative politics. That's the third, another field. And really, comparative politics really goes back to the origins of political science, and most of our courses are designed where you look at regions of the world. So you have Latin American politics, and typically what the professor will do is, Professor Fabian Borges teaches, he's probably our main comparativist. Maybe the class will be organized around comparing Mexico to Venezuela to Bolivia to Argentina, this kind of thing. You have East Asian politics, courses probably on China, Japan, the Koreas, that kind of thing. And the idea is you're comparing, just as the title of the field says. And then we have international relations, where you learn about international law, how nations relate to one another, theories of international relations, realism, and these other kinds of things. So that's sort of the 5 fields. And then those seminars, those senior seminars that you take as a student, you have to take 2 of them. They are they map onto those. So there's 5 senior seminars, but they can be taken multiple times as the topics change. And I like to tell the students that, for example, if you're interested in international relations, you can tailor things. So you take your 1 required class in the field, but you could take all 3 of your electives in international relations. And of course, you have the lower division international relations. So out of the 11, it's 11 classes actually in political science. There's a 12th class, that's the upper division writing requirement that is taught by the social sciences college. But you could tailor it. So out of the 11 political science classes you could take 4 or 5 in the field you really like. And when the students come in, I try to advise them, don't load up in one field yet. Sample them maybe the first semester or 2, and then maybe when you're a senior, you can really dive in, if you want, into a single area. So there's flexibility, even though there aren't an enormous number of units and all these different formal tracks. You can, and these classes, multiple sections of these various classes are offered every term. So getting the classes is not terribly difficult.
Yeah, which I think is also a great selling point for a major as well, especially other majors, whether it's at our school or a different school, where they might be very sequence based. And if you miss out on it one semester, you might have to wait like a whole year to try to get into it. And so you have the bachelor's degree, but then do you also offer any minors within the political science department?
There's actually several minors. The main minor that serves a lot of students is the pre-law minor. We are also, our department is sort of the chief advisor to the pre-law pathways, which is a new, it's a pathway. It's not a program. It's not an academic program, but it's kind of an advising emphasis for students who aren't political science majors, or even students who take the minor in pre-law. Professor Thor Galori and myself are the sort of the main advisors for that. So if you can take the pre-law minor, that's 18 units, and that's mainly concentrated in political science classes, although there are electives in some other departments. And it just corresponds to those public law or constitutional law courses that I mentioned that are in the major fields. So Bill of Rights class, the Structures and Powers class, Judicial Process class. All the pre-law minors take all of those courses, and then there's a few electives. We have a lot of pre-law minors. There's also a political science minor. We have a few people who take that. And then we have another minor that we do jointly with, I think, philosophy and econ. We don't administer that one, but we administer the pre-law minor. Mm-hmm. And political science is the traditional major or the traditional discipline that you study if you want to go on to be a lawyer. But you can take the law school, admissions test, and no matter what your major. A lot of people in philosophy, there are people who take physics and math and go on to law school. But traditionally, it's housed in the pre-law programs are housed in political science departments for the obvious reason of the traditional emphasis upon law at the undergraduate level. We're building up our we had a couple of retirements, and we've hired Professor Galori. She's done a good job in building up our judicial internship program. So now every spring we have multiple people. This current spring she's in her first year, and she's got student interns in the local court. We can say more about that later if you like, but
Sure.
But it's a prominent part of the political science department, the overall role of the political science department in the pre-law track, you might say.
And of course, one question we get a lot, and I'm sure you get it too, is career areas or career opportunities, career options. So for you, if a student's asking, like, what can I do with this major, or what have you seen some of your graduates go into? How would you answer that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We had an alumni event in our department last term, and we invited a number of graduates from the past, really over the last 15 years or so. We had about 10 former students here meeting with our students and had kind of a meet and greet, networking, but also each one of them briefly talked about their background. The traditional route that you go if you're coming out of political science is it's law, education, or some sort of government service. But it's not so narrow as that anymore. Unless you're coming out of a discipline that has a more professional or vocational focus, like if you're in a nursing program or you're doing accounting as an undergraduate, more and more, what I found is that it helps if students have a basic liberal education background and more of a traditional background. And it was really interesting to see our alums. Out of the 10 people or so that were there, we had 2 or 3 lawyers, and they're all doing well, and have gone to places. Our students have gone to places like Pepperdine and University of Southern California Law. And then other places like Laverne and whatnot. So a whole range of people who go on to law school. We have educators. One of our former students that was there was helping create a day school, private sector day school. We had 2 fellows there working in industry, one working for a major developer, another one working for I think it was a Dutch or a Danish lighting company. I can't remember. Another that has worked in alumni relations in universities and actually worked for former California governor, is now back working at Cal State San Bernardino. It's interesting the range of things that people are doing. So the one person, for example, was a developer, works for a developer, and is really kind of a liaison with governments because there's all kinds of things with zoning and permitting and whatnot with the construction company. And it's just interesting to find out where people go. And they all attribute a great deal of their success to their experience in our department. Because our department is sort of, it has a big, a real coloring of traditional liberal arts. So you read great books, but you also, a lot of the professors incorporate statistics and things like that in their courses in terms of, empirical measurements of things like public opinion and other matters. In fact, probably more than half of our faculty members publish using these kinds of techniques. So you have modern sort of behavioral techniques, and then you have the sort of, you read, there's a good chance you'll end up reading some Plato if you're a political science student in our department. So you end up with very well-rounded people. Multiple students come to me, and from previous students come to me and they say, wow, it's really interesting how this kind of exposure to things really help them going forward. I mean, it really helps if you're a learned person and you have a wide range of knowledge and interest. Because so much of what happens in the workplace and careers, and people don't realize this, is you got to be able to have conversations. It really helps if you're an interesting person when you're out in the world. You say, in addition to being a hard worker and being competent on whatever technical or professional thing it is. I've had a number of students over the years mention, they really learned to write, they learned to argue, learn how to present decent arguments. And in very, very many job career settings, your ability to write a coherent memo with no grammatical errors and if somebody reads something that you write, even if it's something in a professional business context, if the person says, yeah, this is an effortless read and it's almost a pleasure to read it, it really stands out. This kind of thing is not emphasized enough, I think, in education. It's not just the ability to get proper grammar, but also have a kind of voice in how you present yourself, and that's both in the written word and in the spoken word. And of course, I don't know how coherent I'm sounding here. Maybe I'm undermining my own message here, but in any case.
No, I think you answered that pretty perfectly. I definitely agree with everything that you've said. And let's say students listening to this and they're like, you know what, this sounds very interesting. But I'm on the fence of, do I want to declare this as a bachelor's degree, as a minor, or just take classes in this subject? Do you have any advice or suggestions for that student if they're thinking that?
Yeah, this is one of the hardest things. One of my standard things I tell students is at this time in your life, you're basically trying to figure out two things: what you're good at and what you like. And ideally, insofar as your career and your work life is concerned, if you're going to be that narrow about it, you want to have both of those things, right? You want to enjoy what you're doing. And I guess the third thing is you want to be compensated. So you tend to want to go into an area where you can make some money. And that's all obviously eminently practical. But so it's a little bit difficult. You may know more about this as an advisor, but some years ago, I read a thing where more than half of college graduates, 10 years after they graduate, are in a field that's not related at all to what they studied in college. I think, generally speaking, our department and our particular department and the sort of eclectic character of the faculty and what we teach gives you kind of well-roundedness, kind of preparation in that regard. Now, obviously, if you want to be an accountant, it would probably help if you do accounting in the business school or whatever. But outside of that, having a good, as I say, liberal arts foundation where you're able to think and reason, and from our experience, people, as I say, people go into all these different fields. It's a good foundation, good starting place, because you're reading old books, but you're reading new theories. And of course, it's politics. Aristotle said, political science is the architectonic science. It's not the highest thing. The highest thing are these grand questions of meaning and whatnot for him in metaphysics. But it's the first science because it's, like, for example, if you watch news, what's the serious news? It's political news as opposed to health or entertainment or whatever. There's a reason for that because everything else depends upon the first thing. Who's going to rule? How are we going to govern ourselves as a society? And of course, it goes to the very large things of war and peace and so on and so forth. So there's something sort of, big and profound at the basis of this whole subject. It's why I was interested in it, and it's why a lot of people are. You'll find that a lot of, for example, professors in other disciplines are often talking about politics in their classes. Because why? They tend to be interested people and interesting people, and it's the thing that people talk about. It's the thing that people get angry about. It's the thing that people are obviously opinionated about. So it's a very rich thing, It's a good starting point. So if you're going to end up doing something in your life that you didn't anticipate 15 years earlier, why not have a good, solid, well-rounded background where you have some highfalutin theoretical ideas, but you also learn a lot of practical stuff. The real world of ruling and what it means to get things done, you see, and use almost always in a collective environment because that's the nature of politics. So, again, it's my bias as a person who's interested. I'm sure somebody who teaches chemistry thinks it's the most important thing in the world, and in a certain way it is. you can get at any of these things. And I mentioned Aristotle earlier. Well, he's sort of the founder of all of these disciplines in a certain way, and he obviously thought they were all worth it. So, but yeah, I think if you're going to make the pitch, if this is like a pitch to get students to go political science, I think the idea is it's well-rounded and gives you kind of, I don't know if you want to call it worldliness or something like that. You know, it also helps. It helps to mature you, if I could use the word mature as a verb, because of the nature of the subject. It's sort of broad-based. And the nature of the thing makes you think a little bit outside of yourself. One of the things I like to point out to students is, we tend to be cynical about politicians, they're all liars, this kind of thing. And then I just often try to put it to students, well, what if you were the politician? First of all, you're trying to get votes from many different kinds of people. And let's say you are actually trying to do what is good, insofar as you understand that thing to be good. Think about how hard it would be to do any of this. Imagine being, you could just think at the top, be the president of the United States or something, but just, be a member of a legislative assembly or just try to get something done on school board. Just think how difficult this kind of thing could be. So again, it has a kind of maturing effect on people.
Yeah, 100%. And let's say misconceptions. I'm sure, with any topic, people might have misconceptions about it. So for political science major, are there any misconceptions you think people may have about it?
Well, for years, I used to had this. I think it was the case that, for example, we have the standard United States government class that everyone takes, or most people take, either at a junior college or wherever they go their 4-year school. And my sense is that a lot of people were afraid of the class, probably, because politics. So, political environments change. It goes in cycles. But traditionally, Americans aren't terribly political. And traditionally, for example, voting rates were not as high in the United States as are, say, in some of the other, whatever you want to call it, Western democracies or something. And I think it's because there's something sort of apolitical about American culture or life. The business of America's business, this whole kind of thing. You say, too busy working to get into all that arguing, and a lot of people are put off by politics, and not unreasonably so, bickering and whining and all this kind of stuff that they tend to associate it with. And that's a misconception about, at least in terms of the worth of the discipline or what's interesting or worthwhile about learning about government and politics. For the reasons I said earlier, it's of central importance. And to be a little more, I'll just say prudential about it or pragmatic, what many students have to confront after they leave school and they get out into the real world, not to sound crass or something, but everything is political. When you find yourself in the real world, I'm sure you, just with your coworkers and in your scenario, you could say things are political. You could put the air quotes around it. Political in the sense that, very often what's going on here is you're trying to handle or manage people with their personalities and their points of view. And it goes back to my point about having a little more respect for politicians, because everyone's got their opinions. Everyone's got their belief. Isn't it interesting how you can go to a medical doctor or some other professional and you just nod your head, and yes, and I'll do this, and you take your medicine, so to speak. Now, I know people argue about the authority of medical professional, but generally that's the attitude. But if you go to a political scientist, I'm a doctor of political science, and you come to me and you say, how should you vote? I say, well, here, take down your notes, and here's who you should vote for. It's not medicine in that way. And this is, again, a theme that goes back to people like Plato and Aristotle, because Plato describes Socrates very often analogizing the political art to the medical art, for example. This is a common thing. So you got to know what a healthy human body is to know how to fix it. You need to know what a healthy political body is, a healthy country, a healthy political community. But that's much more difficult to identify. I sometimes joke with students that, well, we went into political science because we didn't want to do the math. It's kind of easier to become, go the route and you can write and make arguments and, it's puffery or whatever, as opposed to getting the equations right, or if you're going into physics or math. But then you find out when it comes to studying the human things, to use the classic way of talking about it, they're infinitely more complex for the very reason that the traditional view was, because the human things are changeable. One of the basic mistakes that people make is they look at a trajectory. Oh, the trends are going in this way, and so we can just tell where things are going to go, and then it ends up not going that way. Why? For a very simple reason. Human beings can change their minds. Choices can be made that then have these consequences that we don't know where they're going to go. But again, there are people always want to hope for complete solutions and all of that. Again, so the study of politics gives you kind of, like I used the word earlier, like worldliness, and I didn't mean that in the sense of just being, sort of merely, I don't know what, self-interested or materialistic. What I mean by that is it brings a maturity, or let's say a traditional word would be wisdom. You learn limits. And, so very often, for example, if you're in a business setting or your workplace, and you're trying to accomplish something, one of the basic things you learn in the old days, you would say as you grow up and become an adult, but really it's a kind of political sensibility. I don't necessarily need to win the argument. If I can get somebody on board, like a politician does, we get the different stakeholders, and now you could look at it in a cynical way. It's a vote trading. I'll give you this. I'll give this guy this to get this. I'll give her this to get this from her. But really it has more to do with giving people their due. I had a colleague one time was talking about being in a meeting, and I said, man, part of this is just respect, hearing the other person out, being collegial, and getting to a point of common ground. But our motivations may not be identical, and our ends may not be identical. But ultimately, we're doing what? We're getting to something like the common good. And this requires, for example, not necessarily wanting to be so prideful as to win, and I need you to recognize the superiority of my position, you say. And so this is the kind of thing, if you read books and you read history in a certain way, can really help you in your life if that's your goal. The larger issue is really what makes you happy in life. I have former students of mine. It's really interesting. I have a former student of mine who works at Costco. And I'm rambling here, but works at Costco, and originally thought he was going to go to grad school and all that, and had the Costco job. By the way, I tell students this: don't necessarily turn your back on some opportunity that's right in front of your face. This guy was working part-time at Costco while he was a student here. He's now like a mid-level manager at a place, makes good money, and in his spare time reads political history. I sometimes teach the political thought of Shakespeare. He reads Shakespeare to this day, and he graduated 20 years ago. You know what I mean? His life is richer and more full. And he'll say that the things that he learned here working at Costco and Rialto, wherever it was, has he's learned something, and it's a worthwhile thing. And those are things like when I see the alumni come back, it's really gratifying, in any case.
I don't know, and I appreciate like all the student stories you have, because I think that will definitely relate to anyone listening to this. And talking about opportunities with your department, are there any resources that your department might offer for students?
Well, the obvious one is we have about a dozen scholarships that we provide every year. Several of them are in our graduate programs. We have a master's program, MA program in National Security Studies, and a MS, Master of Science program in National Cybersecurity Studies. But a number of them, I think a little more than half of the scholarships are for undergrad. So that's the obvious thing. And then, of course, there's the basic things that you do as professors, and you're writing letters of recommendation, getting placements. We're really trying to beef up the internships. The number of interns had already been declining before COVID hit, and they completely cratered during the COVID thing. And I'm appreciative to Professor Galori, who's building up the judicial internships, but we'd like to have more of that. I have a couple of former students of mine where I'm trying to set up internships. One of the things that I try to emphasize to students is that so much of this has to do with the proactivity of the students themselves. So if you're setting up internships and people don't take them or don't apply for them, then there's not much you can do as the professors. So, but it's what you're trying to do as much as you can. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about finding what you can do, what you're interested in. And I try to tell stories of previous students who did internships and realized that this wasn't the area. I've had students who wanted to go into politics, for example, and they worked on a political campaign or something, or went to work for a congressman or something like that, and didn't realize they didn't like it. It wasn't for them. Well, that's a learning experience. So the real key, it's like, what do they say? Half of life is showing up. You can't passively, move your way through life. And I just overwhelmingly encourage students, go to every event, go to every speaker, because most of this has to do with networking. But it doesn't have to be viewed as you're just being mercenary. It's really about finding things out. And one of my basic spiels that I give to students is part of the thing about networking is so people get to know you. Because if you go out looking for jobs, having connections helps, but you have to understand what connections really mean. This is not a matter of corruption. It's a matter of people know you, and when people will hire you, or they'll have you invite you into an organization if they think you're a good colleague. Everyone will admit that that's a big thing. That goes back to what I was saying earlier. When you're in an office or something like that, getting along with people and working together depends so much upon what the personality or the character of the person, and that could be irrespective of political views or even just technical skills. Obviously, you need competence, and you don't want people who are extreme in one way or another, generally speaking. But a lot of it just has to do with the kind of person you are, and so you're connecting with people and showing that you're a person of goodwill, and so on and so forth. That you have to have a more positive view of this kind of thing, but you have to be proactive. So internships, independent studies, then obviously the material benefits like scholarships and so forth, and letters of recommendation. I try to tell students as much as I can, make yourself known. You can ask professors often will write you a letter of recommendation even though you never said anything in class. But if they really know you, and they really remember you, well, then they could write something more meaningful about you. Because very often when you go to apply for a job or something like that, or apply for grad school or law school or something, those people reading those letters are reading hundreds and hundreds of letters, and how do they stand out? And I had, for example, a student who went to law school, and I got a letter back from the admissions group or whoever it was at the law school. So my letter was instrumental in getting the student a scholarship and this kind of thing. Now, it was an over-the-top letter. This is one of the most outstanding students I ever had, and I just went into great detail. But I was able to go into great detail because I had this experience with the student, you see. And so the letter stands out. These people, wow, this guy. So again, it's not just mercenary. It's not just self-interested. It goes back to the politician thing. You have to, as the student, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. People think things are unfair or this kind of thing. Then you get older and you find yourself in a position where you're hiring people. It looks very different when you're on the other side of the table, because you can make a major mistake if we don't have to go into the headlines in the news where you find out people there are people who do really terrible things. Criminals, this kind of thing. But less than that, things can go badly for an organization or a company or something like that. So again, it's to take advantage of those kinds of opportunities that we do provide, whether it's, for example, scholarships. Sometimes the department reviews the applicants to the scholarship, which we run through the financial aid thing. And sometimes we wonder, we don't have that many people applying. Mm-hmm. Now we have to do more in terms of advertising, email blasts and all this other kind of thing. But at the end of the day, by the way, even at the college level, sometimes we find out there are opportunities for grants and things for faculty, and we find out later from the deans and the provosts, and we didn't get nearly as many. You know what I mean? There's so much of this is you're providing, you're in counseling and advising and whatnot. This. Sometimes you want to just reach over and grab the person and say, hey, come on, come join us, come. get involved. And but that's just we do the best we can.
Yeah, for sure. And let's say a student has a question, they're interested. Is there a best way of how they can reach your department?
Sure, just email me, Zentner at CSUSB.edu, and my name is there on the thing. I don't know if people just only listening to this. It's Zentner. But if you just go to the political science webpage, you'll see my name. And you can go to any political science professor. If you just wander in the department, whoever happens to be there. And I tell students all the time, you don't want to be a pest. You don't want, professors are busy, but it really helps if you go to people in person. And I know with the virtual and online, so much stuff is online now, but it really helps if you meet people in person. It matters a lot. And again, it's all a part of that showing up. So go to our department website, you get all contact information there, and you can, by the way, you could send a short email to me, and I can give you a rundown. You can talk to me. You can come by the office. My office hours are posted, that kind of thing. But also, I can direct you to, for example, you're interested in law. I can direct you to Professor Galore. You're interested in, say, government service. Like some students say, I want to go into foreign service. Well, we have several professors. We have our clubs. So, for example, we have the national. I don't know if you were going to ask me about this, but yep. We have our National Security Club, headed by Professor Steve Childs. Those are for people in our grad programs, but also undergraduates who are interested in things like international relations, going into things like the intelligence community or the customs service, sometimes things like FBI, whatever, and other areas. We also have Pi Sigma Alpha, which is the National Political Science Honor Society. Our local chapter is award-winning. About every other year, we get one of the Chapter of the Year awards. That's run by Professor Cristina Villegas. And we have multiple events happening. We have a writing competition coming up here next, another couple of weeks. We have the alumni meeting that I mentioned last term. That was organized by her and the officers of the student club, Pi Sigma Alpha, the Theta Iota chapter. It's a real vehicle for a lot of the events that we put on. And again, talking about resources for students, that includes networking, because often previous students come, not just at that alumni event, but others. And we have a major banquet every year where we induct the new officers and we give out all those scholarships that I mentioned. So there's a community within the department is what I'm saying. And then, of course, Professor Galore over time is going to build up again our Law Society program. Again, sort of geared for the pre-law folks, but any of the students interested in law careers. So again, right now we call it NatSec, the National Security Club, is very busy. Virtually every week, Professor Childs is posting notices to students about job fairs. There's a major colloquium every spring where the students in the programs present their work. We have multiple recruiters coming from government agencies and whatnot, interested in things like the intelligence community. So there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of these resources involved. And they're contact points. But if you're not sure what to do, just contact me. Just come to the department directly, and then I can be kind of a conduit to specific professors, depending on your interest, and of course, obviously, I can talk about the department as well. Obviously, I am not shy and can talk and talk and talk. But that's the best way, yeah.
I appreciate that. So much useful information, so much that your department offers with scholarships and clubs and other resources. But Dr. Zentner, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.